What 30 days in solitary confinement does to the human mind begins long before the door closes. It begins with the architecture. A concrete box 6 feet wide and 8 feet deep. A steel door with no handle on the inside. A bed bolted to the floor. A combination sink and toilet made of stainless steel. No windows, no clocks, no human voice. This room exists in almost every maximum security prison in the United States. They call it segregation, restrictive housing, the shoe, the box. But it is simply a space designed to hold a human being in the absence of everything. No sound, no touch, no variation, no confirmation that the outside world still exists. The human mind was never meant to inhabit such a space. It evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to process a constant stream of sensory information, to communicate, to move, to predict the behavior of others. In solitary confinement, all of that stops. And when the environment stops providing input, the brain does not go silent. It begins to speak to itself. In the first few hours, the body is still running on the rhythm of the world it left behind. It expects noise. It expects the door to open. It expects a voice. But the door doesn't open. The silence is not empty. It is dense. It presses against the ears. Within 24 hours, sleep becomes difficult. Not because of anxiety alone, but because the brain has lost its timekeepers. No sunrise, no sunset. No meals at predictable intervals. Just the flicker of fluorescent light that never turns off. The body tries to rest, but the light hums at a frequency just below hearing. The brain registers it anyway. By the second day, the lack of horizontal lines and distant objects begins to affect perception. The eyes have nothing to focus on beyond a few feet. The ciliary muscles, used to adjusting focus between near and far, lock into a single position. Headaches begin. Pressure builds behind the eyes. By the third day, a craving emerges. Not for food, not for water, but for human contact. Any contact. A voice, a touch, even a glance. Research into sensory deprivation shows that the brain interprets isolation as a physical threat. The same neural circuits that activate during danger begin to fire. The heart rate climbs. Cortisol floods the system. And yet, there is nothing to fight, nothing to run from. The body is screaming, but there is no enemy, only the walls. The amygdala, responsible for threat detection, becomes hyperactive. It begins to interpret neutral stimuli as dangerous. The shadow in the corner, the drip of the sink, the sound of your own breathing. Everything becomes a signal. Everything becomes a warning. By the end of the first week, the mind begins to change strategy. It cannot find stimulation outside, so it turns inward. It begins to amplify the smallest details. The texture of the concrete becomes a landscape. Cracks in the paint become rivers. Stains on the ceiling become continents. The hum of the fluorescent light becomes a voice. This is not madness. It is the brain trying to do its job with no materials. The visual cortex, starving for input, begins to release perceptual phenomena. Patterns in the grain begin to move. Faces appear in the shadows. The mind is not breaking. It is compensating. But the compensation comes at a cost. Concentration becomes difficult. A thought that starts clearly unravels within seconds. Memory fragments. You forget what you were thinking about mid-thought. You begin to talk to yourself, not muttering, conversing, arguing, laughing at jokes only you heard. And then you realize you are doing it, and you stop, and the silence returns, deeper than before. By the 10th day, the sense of time begins to disintegrate. Without external markers, the brain loses its ability to sequence events. Hours feel like days. Days feel like weeks. You cannot remember if something happened yesterday or last week. You cannot remember if it happened at all. The pacing begins. 3 steps to the wall. Turn. 3 steps back. It is not exercise. It is an anchor. A repetitive motion to remind yourself that you still exist. That time is still moving. But the rhythm of the pacing starts to feel like a cage inside a cage. The body develops its own schedule. Hunger comes and goes without relation to meals. Sleep comes in fragments. 2 hours here, 30 minutes there. The line between dreaming and waking blurs. You are never fully asleep. You are never fully awake. You exist in a gray zone where thoughts feel like memories and memories feel like thoughts. After 30 days, the structure of the personality begins to erode. Psychiatrists who have studied solitary confinement describe a distinct set of symptoms. Hypervigilance, the inability to filter out irrelevant stimuli. Every sound is a threat. Every shadow is a presence. There is also a profound apathy, a difficulty experiencing pleasure. The brain, having shut down its emotional receptors to survive the void, struggles to turn them back on. Things that once mattered no longer matter. The future becomes abstract. The past becomes inaccessible. You exist only in the present moment, and the present moment is a concrete box. Research from neurologists shows that prolonged isolation reduces the volume of the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and spatial navigation. The brain literally shrinks, not metaphorically, physically. The tissue that holds your memories begins to dissolve. By 30 days, the hallucinations are no longer subtle. They are not just patterns in the paint. They are figures, voices, full sensory events. The brain, desperate for social interaction, begins to generate company. Inmates describe seeing family members sitting in the cell with them, hearing conversations through the walls, feeling the presence of someone standing behind them. When they turn around, no one is there. But the feeling does not fade. The presence remains, watching, waiting. The mind has become a theater, and you are both the audience and the actor. And you cannot leave. The long-term damage does not end when the door opens. The world outside the cell is overwhelming, too bright, too loud, too fast. Every sound is a threat. Every person is a potential danger. Social interaction, once taken for granted, becomes exhausting. The simplest conversation requires enormous effort. You cannot follow the rhythm of it. You cannot predict the pauses. You have forgotten how to read faces, how to interpret tone, how to be near another person without flinching. Studies of former solitary confinement prisoners show elevated rates of anxiety disorders, depression, and post-traumatic stress. But the deepest wound is not clinical. It is existential. The sense of self, which depends on feedback from others, becomes thin, fragile. You are not sure who you are anymore, because for 30 days there was no one there to see you. And if no one sees you, do you still exist? Solitary confinement was designed as a tool of control, a temporary measure, a way to manage the violent and the unstable. But what it actually does is produce the very instability it claims to contain. It takes a mind built for connection and starves it of connection. It takes a creature shaped by language and silences it. And when that creature emerges, it is not reformed, it is not punished. It is simply diminished, hollowed out, left with a vigilance that will never fully relax and a loneliness that will never fully heal. The box is not just a room, it is a technology. And what it manufactures is not order. It is damage. Permanent. Invisible. Silent. Carried inside long after the steel door finally opens. But the architecture of isolation does not only exist behind prison walls, it exists in other places. Other systems. Other structures designed to separate, to silence, to control. The same mechanisms that break a mind in a concrete cell are at work elsewhere, in different forms, with different names. The box is just one version of a much larger pattern, a pattern that raises a question. If 30 days of isolation can dismantle a human mind so completely, what else in the modern world is slowly doing the same thing? Only slower, only quieter, only without walls you can see.